The order was sealed, the wax still warm, a single, unquestionable command. Before the next sunrise, the princess must die, quietly, efficiently, and without witnesses. The man chosen for the task was the crown's own trusted assassin, trained to eliminate threats who smiled in daylight. But what the court didn't know, what history tried to bury, was that vows had already been spoken. In the shadows of the palace, under the very night meant to end her life, the princess married the man sent to kill her. This isn't a story about romance saving the day. It's about how love, born from violence and power, becomes an act of defiance, and how defiance is never allowed to survive. Royal courts are brutal places. The princess had outlived her purpose, becoming a liability. But the court never anticipated the impossible bond that had already formed between the executioner and his victim. In a world where silence was a survival skill, a princess was born. From her earliest years, she learned that walls had ears, and that affection was often conditional. Though surrounded by luxury, her life was tightly controlled, her future negotiated long before she could speak for herself. She was valuable not for who she was, but for what she represented: an alliance, a claim, a symbol that could be traded or discarded. As the political climate of the court shifted, her presence became inconvenient. Whispers followed her through marble corridors. Advisors argued in closed chambers. A woman with royal blood, unbound by marriage, was dangerous in times of instability. She was observant, intelligent, and increasingly aware that the smiles offered to her were thinning. When invitations stopped arriving and trusted servants were quietly replaced, she understood the truth the court would never say aloud. Her life was no longer guaranteed. History often remembers princesses as ornaments, but those who lived inside the palace knew better. They were pieces on a board where losing pieces was expected, and the game was about to reach its cruelest move. The assassin had no name the court cared to remember. He existed outside lineage and legacy, trained in secrecy, and rewarded in coin and silence. Recruited young, he was shaped into a tool loyal not to ideals, but to orders. The crown did not ask him to judge, only to act. Over the years, he had ended lives that threatened stability, erased figures whose deaths would never be acknowledged. He understood power intimately, not from privilege, but from proximity. Unlike nobles, he saw what happened when someone became inconvenient. When the sealed order arrived, it looked no different from the others. A target, a location, a time. Only when he saw the name did hesitation creep in. Not fear, hesitation. He had seen the princess before, though she never knew who he was. He had guarded corridors she walked through, watched from shadows as she laughed with people who would later betray her. He knew the court was lying about her. They always lied before killing someone quietly. For the first time, the assassin understood he was not being asked to remove a threat. He was being asked to erase a truth. Their first real conversations happened by accident, or so it seemed. Disguised as a minor court official, the assassin encountered the princess away from formal settings, where titles weighed less and words mattered more. She spoke freely, unaware of who he truly was, and he listened not as a predator, but as someone hearing honesty inside a palace built on deception. They met again, and then again, each encounter charged with something unspoken. She sensed safety in him, an absence of calculation that felt rare and dangerous. He sensed in her not weakness, but exhaustion, the weariness of someone surrounded by power yet utterly alone. Their connection did not begin as romance. It began as recognition. To people who understood they did not belong to the world they were trapped in. By the time affection surfaced, it was already too late to stop. The assassin still had not received the order, but he knew one would come. In courts like this, closeness was a warning sign. Love was never an accident. It was a vulnerability the palace would eventually exploit. The order arrived at dusk. The timing was deliberate. Fewer witnesses, fewer chances for intervention. The princess was to die before dawn, her death attributed to sudden illness. The assassin read the instructions twice, hoping for ambiguity that was not there. He was to act alone, no mercy, no deviation. Disobedience would mean public execution, meant to discourage others from forgetting their place. He understood the logic. The court needed her gone, and he was the quiet solution. But something had shifted. Killing her would not simply be another task. It would be the final confirmation that nothing human survived inside the palace. That night, he went to her not as an assassin, but as a man who refused to let her die without truth. When he told her why he was there, she did not scream. She did not beg. She listened, and when she spoke, it was not fear that filled her voice, but clarity. She had suspected this moment all along. What she had not expected was the choice they were about to make. The marriage was not born of hope, but of defiance. There was no priest, no witnesses, no celebration, only two people standing in borrowed time, aware that survival was unlikely. They exchanged vows not because they believed it would save them, but because it reclaimed something the court had already stolen the right to choose. In marrying her assassin, the princess transformed an act of violence into an act of resistance. The assassin knew this choice sealed his fate. Killing her was no longer possible. Letting her live would mark them both as traitors. Yet for the first time in his life, he acted without orders. The vows were whispered, hurried, and absolute. When it was over, nothing had changed politically. The guards still patrolled. The court still slept. But something irreversible had occurred. The palace had lost total control. By dawn, rumors began to surface. Servants noticed movements that made no sense. Documents disappeared. Someone had realized the plan was unraveling. The court responded with precision and cruelty. There were no arrests announced, no accusations spoken publicly. Instead, doors closed quietly. Allies vanished. Records were altered. The assassin was taken first, accused of treason without explanation. The princess was placed under protection, isolated from everyone she trusted. Officially, nothing had happened. Unofficially, panic spread through the council. A secret marriage was not just scandalous, it was dangerous. It suggested loyalty beyond the crown, a bond they could not control. The princess was removed from public view, her name slowly erased from correspondence. When questions arose, answers were vague. Illness. Grief. Retreat. The assassin was never seen again. Some said he was executed. Others claimed he was sent on a mission from which no one returned. The truth was deliberately fragmented. Power does not destroy evidence loudly. It dissolves it until doubt replaces memory. Within months, the princess ceased to exist in any official sense. No portraits were commissioned. No anniversaries observed. It was as if she had stepped out of history itself. Yet whispers persisted. Travelers spoke of a woman resembling her living under a different name. Monks recorded strange donations. A grave appeared without a marker. None of these accounts were confirmed. That uncertainty was intentional. The court had learned its lesson. Killing her outright would create a martyr. Letting her vanish created confusion, and confusion kills stories. The marriage was never acknowledged, but it could not be undone. For a brief moment, the princess had escaped her role. The assassin had ceased being a weapon. They paid for it in full. But they also left behind a problem for power itself, proof that obedience can fracture. This is why their story survives only in shadows, not because it lacked importance, but because it challenged the illusion of absolute control. The princess was meant to die quietly. Instead, she forced the court to rewrite reality. The assassin was meant to be invisible. Instead, he became unforgettable in absence. Their love was not meant to endure, and it did not. But endurance was never the point. What remains is the discomfort their story creates for official history. It asks an unsettling question. If even one moment of choice can disrupt an empire, how fragile is power really? Courts fall, records burn, names disappear, but acts of defiance leave impressions that cannot be fully erased. Somewhere between truth and rumor, the princess and her assassins still exist. Not as heroes, not as legends, but as a reminder that even in the darkest systems, humanity sometimes refuses to die quietly. In the end, there was no victory, no justice. The court just kept going, banners still flying, new names replacing the old as if nothing ever happened. That's the secret to how power survives. It just moves forward, never looking back. The princess wasn't mourned in public, and the assassin was never officially condemned. They were both just silenced, to lives reduced to empty spaces. But silence isn't the same as erasure. What the court couldn't get rid of was the meaning behind what they did. A system built on total obedience was forced to face disobedience, not from rebellion, but from a simple choice. Their connection didn't change the empire or save them, but it revealed something far more dangerous to those in charge: the truth that loyalty to a crown can be broken by something as simple as human connection. That's why their story survives only in whispers, not in monuments. Power tries to write history to make itself seem inevitable. But moments like these show just how fragile it really is. The princess was supposed to be a problem, quietly removed. Instead, she became a question the court could never truly answer. And as long as that question remains whether love can defy absolute authority, their story isn't over.